Oftentimes you'll see Java libraries use annotations to simplify code and help us write less code, help us hide some of the complexity. So for example, in Spring, you might see at repository, and you know that when you annotate something with at repository or at component, that's going to be automatically wired up as a Spring bean. Or perhaps in Hibernate, you know if you annotate a class with at table, you know that that class is going to be associated with the stops table in the database. Now the tricky thing about these is that if you do a control click on at repository, you don't really get too much information. You can see that there's some good documentation about what's going on. But you don't really see any code behind the wiring of a bean or the association of a class to a table. It seems like it's a bit opaque. But in fact, there's actually, these annotations just add metadata to your classes that can be interpreted by other parts of code. So if we do a right click and we say find usages on this at repository class, we can see that, we can see that we use it a couple of times in our own code, but if we look at usage and import, we can go down and let's see, this is located in okay, great. So we can see that this annotation is located in the Spring context jar that we've imported via Maven. And we can see, oh, okay, look, it's used actually a couple times in this jar internally. Let's see how they use it. And if we do a find, we essentially see that they're scanning the class path to look for any classes that are annotated with this annotation. Once they find one, then they run some special logic to register a bean and do all the work that Spring does behind the scenes. And so they're really, these annotations really aren't that magic. In fact, that we can write some of our own annotations. When you go say new, oftentimes when you say new, you get the option of creating a class, and we're familiar with that, an interface, an enum, or even an annotation. And so I've created one just called written while watching TV. I annotate classes or methods or anything I like with this annotation for things I do while I write TV, while I've been watching TV. And it's just a joke annotation, but we can dictate a lot of things. So we can say, if we take a look at the at repository one, we can pull some examples from it. So perhaps I want to specify a target on my new annotation. Now this annotation can only be applied to a class. And if we take a look at, it seems like, okay, we can apply it to a type, a field, a method, a parameter. And here I just want to apply it to a class. So if I try and apply this, my custom annotation to maybe a method, we can see that it gives me a compilation error because we're telling the compiler that this can only be applied to a class. Now I can change this and I can make this method, and we'll see now this is okay. In fact, we can actually, I believe we can add a list You can even add a list of targets that this annotation can be applied to. At retention is pretty simple. It just specifies whether the annotation will be just at runtime or just at compile time. An example of a compile time annotation is at to do, and it's used by IntelliJ. So if you put at to do in your code, IntelliJ does static code analysis before you run the program to find out all the places where you left some work that you need to come back and take a look at again. And so this is very simple. People often use aspect-oriented programming to create cross-cutting concerns, but you can create your own annotations. They're not that magic, and if you just find the usages on perhaps at repository, at component, or at entity, you can see some of the code that does the work behind the scenes to wire up objects, to wire up beans, to wire up databases,